Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Keynote Lecture 2 in the LUMA Days and LUMA Science Research Symposium. My name is Jan Lundell, and I'm the chairman of this session. We apologize for the slight delay. It seems that the data bits are traveling a little bit slow from South Africa to Finland, but now we have everything running smoothly. So we are ready to go. We are honored to have Dr. Angela James as a lecturer today. And she comes from University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa. And the title is Opportunities and Possibilities for Learning Science and Mathematics in the Context of Modern Technology. And we will have a South African view of this, and we look forward to very interesting and stimulating talk. And because we are running a little bit late, so Dr. James, the virtual floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And I really honor and appreciate the invitation to this auspicious occasion. And I know that when we are engaged in teacher education per se, you know, it's really about children, and it's about our experiences of engaging with children and how important that really is. So the presentation that I'm going to share with you is not a heavy research type presentation. It's really an active learning type of engagement where we're looking at, so what is our particular context that we work in, and what are the experiences of various groups of people within these particular contexts. So I know that you've read the abstract, and the presentation is going to go along the lines of the abstract, but I'm also going to waver a bit because I really think the flexibility with how I'm feeling and what we're thinking about at this point in time is something that is crucially important. I do apologize for coming in. I actually came in a bit late into the session. I just could not open. So there was a big problem with that. Okay, so let's go. If we're talking about, for example, the whole experience of science and mathematics, teaching and learning, I want to say teaching and learning. It is so crucially important for us to consider the essential individuals who are present within that space. So you'll see two quotes that I'm starting off with here. And the one is from a learner, and the other is from a teacher. And that's why it's written differently. And the learner says, so much happened last year. I don't really know where to start. And I think we need to sit back and think about that very carefully. This is a learner of 8 years old who is saying this type of thing, or this sentence. The next quote or statement is from a teacher: to have acquired new insights, new skills, and new ways of working. And that's, so really what I'm sharing here is a reflective aspect. And both reflections are saying and really drawing out messages to us. And messages that we need to take note of, and we need to be very aware of as well, but not just to take note and be aware of, but to take action, because certainly these are the essential aspects that need to be taken into account when we're looking at a teaching and learning environment. And remember, the teaching and learning environment is absolutely vast. So you could be challenging me right now and saying, so why am I only putting in a quote from a learner and a teacher? Where's the quote from the parent, for example, or the guardian? Where's the quote from the community person, or even the person who is doing the garden in the community, because that person is also an educator within their own spaces and in interacting with young learners. So in looking at 2020 and looking at 2021, I think we also need to go right forwards as well to, so what else actually happened before then? And these are the things that as teacher educators and as educators, we sit back and we start questioning. For every action that we do, there is a reaction. So it's not just the planning and the action, but it's also the ultimate change. And I'm going to use the word change. I do not want to say outcome. No, I do not want to say impact. No, I do want to say change, because these are the things that we are looking at. Okay. So that's just very, very briefly what we are looking at. That's the title. And you'll note that the title is part of the title, because the title does extend into, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Interrogating research reports, studies, social networks, creative writings, etc. So this is what we are looking at with regard to opportunities and possibilities. But we cannot divorce the opportunities and possibilities from the learners and the teachers. So in South Africa, if we're looking at the context of South Africa, we have a Department of Basic Education, which is mandated to obviously provide and ensure that quality education is offered and is in place across all the schooling sectors. And in South Africa, we have both a private and also a public education sector. The South African National Development Plan, obviously anything that we are doing in South Africa currently is taking our National Development Plan, our NDP, into account. And what is important, together with the World Economic Forum, there is a need to improve the country's performance in mathematics and science. Now, I've put there TIMS 2019 because we know that in terms of the level of performance of South Africa in TIMS, it's embarrassing. So we then need to start questioning what actually is in place within the country with regard to that. And also, so what is happening with regard to now, looking at COVID-19 and 2020 and all the different, I would say, the forces that are playing on the particular context where all this interaction is actually taking place. And then obviously we also have a Schooling 2025, which is important. Where we have the long-term vision of education priorities. And there I've put the NDP again to remind us that the Schooling 2025 does not go on its own. It goes also with the NDP. And notice what is very important is that all South Africans by 2030 should have access to education and training of the highest quality, leading to significantly improved learning outcomes. As I said to you, I would love to use the word change, but that's the education documents, and those are the terminologies that we are expected to use when we are speaking about it. Okay? So now we know that COVID has impacted on a number of countries, and it's impacted in South Africa. And obviously, there are a number of different things that have taken place. You will notice that my presentation is not going to go according to research question, etc., etc. I think I've made it much more fluid. So with this impact of the pandemic, obviously the ICT sector, but it's not just the ICT sector, it is in education. So when we look at science education, and when we want to look at, for example, we do ICT and science and maths education in South Africa, these are some of the topics that you will come across. And quite clearly, when we're looking at it in 2021, then you've got to start saying, okay, yes, I can see e-learning. Okay, they're saying don't squander the STEM switch on. So what is that about? Robotics and coding, which is important. Yes, but in the context of South Africa, which we're going to speak about much more just now, how is that happening? Then we have a Center for the Advancement of Science and Maths. So who are they and what is it that they are doing? teachers and perceptions of, and it's of using ITC within the particular, ICT within the particular context that they're working with. And there we also look at how universities are involved in community engaged type activities during this particular period of COVID, but even beyond COVID. So we need to think about all of that as well. So in looking at what had taken place, I looked at a number of different reports and I looked at magazines, I looked at newspaper articles, and I'm just going to share a few messages which I thought were pertinent to what we are talking about. And in looking at what comes through, the messages I have decided to do in terms of the content is to look at content analysis, is to look at messages from learners or students and messages from teachers or teacher educators, etc. And I think what is important is the types of work that is taking place in order for us to understand the context in South Africa. So Lara, for example, is saying, and this is taken from a research that was conducted, and they looked at what it is that the children liked and they didn't like about learning and using technology also in the years to come. But I'm particularly concerned with those statements that focused more on a maths and learning with technology. So Lara was saying, doing maths on my own through distance learning was okay. But for subjects like English and history, you want to interact and debate a bit more. And so these weren't so nice. And I look at this and I start saying, well, why would somebody taking maths see it as such a solitary type of engagement when maths can be such a social experience for everybody as well? And we almost have to unpack how children are thinking about the learning of the various subjects that they're engaging with as well, but taking into account the child's emotional experiences and social experiences as well, not just looking at, well, what is it for a particular person that we are working with, okay? And then when we look at Amy, I think it's better to be in school because you can ask the teacher direct questions. The best thing about e-learning is being able to take breaks whenever you want and learning how to work on a computer. Now, think about this. If we are looking at learning at school and why it's better to be in school, this child obviously has the solitary type of environment that they are working within. But we now need to start thinking about how can we take the solitary environments within the houses or within the families and start looking at how we can take our communities, and I'm going to go into that much more later on, instead of us looking at solitary, but looking at a broader base, even within the COVID times as well. Here is a student who is using a cell phone to do the work. And obviously, parents were saying, whenever they saw me on my phone, they thought I was playing games. They didn't understand what studying online meant, and they were there all the time. I had to find my own secret place to study. So this message is so loaded, and we then have to start asking about the context that the students and the learners are actually engaging with or have to face in their home settings. And we know from our students that we work with and from learners and teachers that we engage with, that in many instances, I don't have pictures of them here, but in many instances, you would have a family of 4 living in a room almost the size of an office, which would be, I would say, probably about 8 meters by 8 meters and maybe 2 rooms. Now, think about somebody who needs to be at home now. They cannot be on campus. How do they study? But more than that, they cannot use their laptop because of the infrastructure and the internet connections that they have there. So how are they studying? They are using their cell phone. And I can assure you, I have received assignments from students where they have sat and they've typed out the whole assignment on their cell phone. So as teacher educators, can we then say to them, you are expected to write this test in 1 hour and we expect you to submit it in 1 hour. And what are they doing? They're writing on their cell phone. I mean, I marvel at students who write on their cell phones like this. I do 111 because I cannot write messages with all of that. And then coming to this comment here, where we're looking at a scenario where the institution has catered for this type of experience. And the students were given 24 hours to complete each exam. And they write the exam at night when the house is quiet. But more than that, because of the data charges that we have in South Africa, students have been provided with data, but the data is more active at night because that's when the students say they want to study and they can study more at night when everybody else is sleeping. So it shows you the types of dynamics that the students and the learners actually have to mediate in order for them to have that type of learning experience. And these are obviously a lot of challenges that children across the world in various centers actually experience. So I would say it's not akin only to the South African context. It is found in various sectors globally as well. But I think what you need to think about here is the gratitude that they have and the effort that has been made and the resilience that has been shown in order for this learning to actually start taking place. So I'm giving you the presentation, but I'm also integrating it with much more discussion so you can understand how this all links up and ties together. When we look at the teachers and what the teachers had to say here, the educators and learners, they had to adapt rapidly to a situation where they are not allowed to interact face-to-face, obviously. And what was important was to now work with the schooling extended community. So you have to now work with parents. You have to also engage community individuals who could be involved. You could be integrating with students, and I'll tell you about that just now as well, where students are mentors within particular communities, and they would also work with teachers as well to mentor the learners. Now, if you think of the range of the devices and the types of means in terms of communication, there was the video calls that were taking place. Tablets were actually given to students. And in instances where families did not have tablets, then the communication would be via WhatsApp and it would be on a cell phone. And this is an important initiative or aspect that needs to be considered. There is a community organization, and I'll speak about that even more, but they have worked with students who are using the WhatsApp to communicate with the teachers and with the learners in order to share the content, but not just to share the content about maths and science, but also to raise issues and questions about the learning context and the next one, which obviously needs to be looked at, that in terms of the teaching and the flexibility that has to take place and the thinking amongst the teachers and the mentors with how best to work with the situation, it is so important that one can understand what has to be in place. So the use of videos and obviously short videos, whether they're in different formats, MP5s or whatever the case may be, they are very important. And the use of those videos, I mean, you could WhatsApp a video, and you could also watch the video on the WhatsApp, because in South Africa, we're using WhatsApp. You could use it on the WhatsApp as well. If people don't, or where many communities in actual fact don't have access to a computer or one other type of device, except obviously the cell phone. So in both rural and urban areas, the most common instrument or device that is being used and that can be accessed is the cell phone. Okay. And another aspect which teachers obviously had to deal with was the pastoral role. And they had to intensify that pastoral role. Because emotionally, there were a number of issues that learners obviously had to face and they had to deal with. And this is an aspect that one has to consider with regard to not just for the teachers or for the learners, but also how does this take place for even the families where all this is actually happening. So what happens in families? And I mean, with the number of COVID deaths that have been happening, oh my, it is. And just this morning, we got another warning that we are now sitting on over 8,800 daily, daily numbers of people who are positive. And we now have to think about the fact that it's not just about learning, but it's about everything else that is happening around you. So it's not just for the learners, it's the teachers. The teachers also have children that they have to be able to work with. And how do they then work with those particular contexts? And we have to look at how do we work with that? Okay. So if we're looking at digital education with an eye on the future, and this is 19 June 2020, and I've taken this from one of the newspapers, which is the Mail and Guardian. This, you can see now, there are a number of issues that you have to look at here. Okay, when was the picture taken? Because each of these children should have a mask. But then we also have to consider in various contexts where poverty is so rife, do all the children actually have access to masks? Do all the schools have access to the sanitation, to the actual liquids that they need to be using? And I actually wanted to bring mine out here, that my sanitizer, but how many schools actually have sanitizer available? How many schools actually have the masks available? So yes, I may be speaking to you about science and maths education. I may be speaking to you about education, but I'm also speaking to you about the life of a child and the life of individuals as well. And we cannot divorce all that from them. So if you're looking at digital education and the fact that each child has a device to them, what a wonderful situation for every single learner in South Africa, whether they are rural or urban. But is that happening? No. And I'm not going to give any percentages or anything of the sort with regard to that. But besides the school and what happens within the classroom, I've got the question, what is beyond there? What is there beyond? And when I'm saying beyond the school, beyond the classroom, there are so many different organizations that are in place with regard to science and maths education. And you can see here, I'm sharing the fact that all these organizations have come on board, and what they are now working with is e-learning and obviously online learning and the development of resources for teachers to use in the classroom as well. And this is just some examples of what are there, but you also have other examples. For example, we have the ESCOM Expo Science, which gets learners to have and develop working with problems within their communities and developing solutions using the scientific approach. And what is important within all of that is that the learners are engaging with their community. And obviously the basic science and the maths that you're working with, but also the technology is integrated if they are going to be developing solutions for the problems that they face within their particular communities. And I think what is also important is that we also have an organization, which is the Primary Science Project, and which has wonderful programs. And you'll be surprised that 2020 is probably a bursting of what is available for teachers in terms of how to learn to use the various programs that are in place, the platforms that are in place, but there's an absolute burst. And these are really, in many instances, available freely to teachers for them to actually access. But what we have to think about is, do all the teachers have the access to it as well? Because in many of the rural contexts, the teachers will only have their cell phone. And that is what they are trying to work with in terms of that. Now, to go deeper into one of these organizations, which, as you can see, is called CASME. And as I spoke to it just now, the Center for the Advancement of Science and Mathematics Education. I want to speak a bit more about CASME. And if you look at CASME and what CASME are doing, they have Science to Go. It's a mobile laboratory. Now, many schools, over 40% of the schools do not have laboratories. And where there is a laboratory, it is not a fully functioning laboratory. I have been to schools where the microscope is stuck in a cupboard because the children may break the microscope. That's not what should be happening. The microscope is there to be used, and therefore it should be used. But let me carry on to Science to Go, which is a mobile, it's a Kumbi, it's a mobile Kumbi, it's a laboratory. It actually has a lab within it, and it goes to the various schools, so that where the schools do not have labs available, then it's important that these practical activities in science can actually take place. So it's science, but remember, in science we use a lot of maths, and there's a lot of technology that's integrated. Or I can also say in technology, we are using science and we are integrating maths as well. So there are a number of aspects that we have to take into account. Okay, here, for example, the Future Fund is looking at the importance of calculators for learners. Now, how can you learn science and maths without a calculator? And this community organization does this. But they also have resources for teachers during the COVID times. And you can quite clearly see here that the resources that have been developed are hybrid type resources, and they are also online, totally online or also hybrid. And these are important because the teachers, I mean, this is shoops. It came onto their laps during 2020. They have so much to work with. In some classrooms, there are 80 to 70 learners in a class with one teacher. And you then have to think about, how does the assessment take place? There's not even a support or an assistant teacher who's present in that classroom. Okay. So now, when we're looking at, well, what are the possibilities with regard to what we are looking at? As I said earlier on, if we are going to be making technology available to all those who cannot afford it and embracing it in the classroom, then we can provide equal opportunities for everybody. Because presently in South Africa, what has happened with COVID is the divide between the haves and the have-nots. The inequality is a stark reality. Because where the private schools, for example, or schools belonging to the private sector, had the resources to be able to be flexible and to adapt very quickly. Many of those learners are very well resourced in terms of finances, in terms of economics. So therefore, they were not in a so-called left behind category. In the government sector, where, for example, we're still having issues with sanitation in schools, and even the provision in some instances of electricity at schools, then you have to think about, so the provision of laptops in those schools, how is that possible? If your basics are not in place, how else can you work with everything else? So here, we then need to say laptops, tablets, e-readers, smartphones can be used to connect teachers and learners and to help them to interact anywhere they are in new and interesting ways. That's a wonderful ideal, but it's a possibility. And these are the things that we need to look at and we need to work towards. Because when we're thinking about what it is that we are doing, we cannot think about, here's my context, this is what I have, and this is the only way I can work. No, we have to vision forwards and we have to think about, so what is the growth and what is it that we can actually envisage and take the whole context to and take everybody to. And I think that's what we need to be thinking about all the time. So technologies such as virtual reality and augmented reality are open to different types of situations that we actually have. And when we start speaking and thinking about all of that, then we need to start saying, so when we're speaking about a virtual reality, let me just go back to that. It is so common that in some instances in the South African setting, you have classrooms, and in that classroom, there is a setting, you have the screen, and the teacher is zoomed in, or the science center is zoomed into that particular classroom. And those learners can then engage in a virtual space with what is being presented to them. And these are the things that we need to think about very clearly and carefully. With regard to the possibilities, so it's infrastructure that we need to think about. Electricity presently is a bit of an issue in South Africa. We are having load shedding where for 2 hours of the day there's no electricity, so it gets switched off. This morning my electricity was switched off by the electricity providers from 2 o'clock this morning to 4 o'clock. Today, the electricity at home is switched off from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. I'm sitting in my office at work because fortunately there was no load shedding here. So it's about infrastructure. It's about access to the actual internet itself and the providers of the internet. It's about access to a laptop or a device. It's about access to the platforms that are present, and within those devices, what platforms then and what materials do you have access to? And I think it's, so when you're looking at the infrastructure, it's also the home environment. And I've given you a scenario with regard to the home environment and the types of experiences, but I am going to say to you, there's lots of resilience, there's lots of growth, and there is so much learning and enrichment that is actually taking place. And we have to think about how all that is tying together. But I think also in terms of the possibilities, looking at community organizations, looking at the schooling sector, looking at business, and how they can all collaborate together for a much more enriching type of experience that could be had. Here, Obviously, these learners are engaged in a particular program, which is a maths program. It is called Numeric. And Numeric goes in to teach maths. It's an after-school program. So and it works with the mentors from our university who are our students, and they go out and they work with the learners. And the level of engagement is phenomenal because, as you can see, this type of setting, it's a rural school. And these learners also in uniform, we have uniforms within our setting, as you can see. And what is important here is that the engagement in terms of maths and the excitement, this was on their last day of their maths lesson, and they were so, what can I say, so jubilant about the experiences that they were having within their maths encounters. So here I've spoken to this about the VR and what has happened in terms of the pre-recorded lessons. Here also with the teachers to post short and pre-recorded videos and the use of YouTube and the various ways in which that can actually take place. I can tell you from our setting within the university, we have a colleague who is doing kitchen chemistry, and what he does is he does short videos in the lab and he sends them on WhatsApp to the students, and the students access them with the basic information. But what is important is that the students then need to go and do chemistry in the kitchen using the products in the kitchen itself. And then they have to video themselves doing the practical and then send it to the lecturer for assessment. And while they are doing the practical, they have to explain why they are using the different chemicals or why they're using the different procedures in the process. So look at that lovely, lovely innovation with regard to the kitchen chemistry, which is in place and which is happening so fantastically. I think what we also need to think about is the fact that teachers and the skilling of teachers and the knowledge with regard to the various resources, we are presently involved. And just yesterday, we had an orientation with teachers where we are looking at climate change education, and we have 40 teachers involved in that program. And we are teaching the teachers how to use the tablet. But more than that, on that tablet are all the resources that the teachers will require. And then the teachers will be able to teach climate change education to natural sciences and geography learners using the tablet. But when we were speaking to the teachers yesterday, it was like, oh, tablet, we don't know how to use that. And it's the fear of not being able to use the devices that really kills us. And therefore, we have to start off with, how do we make people comfortable first? We don't say, there's it, you got to use it. We've got to look at, how do we make people comfortable? And I think these are the things that we need to think about. So yes, central to what I have been talking about is the teacher and the learner. But more importantly, around the teacher and the learner are all the other players. And those other players are the guardians or the parents, the community individuals, and their peers as well. And in what ways are we actually making use of that social learning? Because if I have a child in a house, and that child is learning on their own, there's a child in the house next door who's also learning on their own. Could those children not sit in the garden and actually learn together? And it doesn't matter what the subjects are, because it's about sharing the knowledge that they have. I think you will notice that I may be science, but I'm very transdisciplinary as well, because really for me, learning is a multi-complex type of process. And we need to look at how do we engage everybody in that process. So I want to say, with all the resources, we can have all those resources, but you know what? No change can take place. So what is the basic element to be considered? And notice I say element, because if you look at the element carbon on the periodic table, It's made up of a number of electrons, etc., protons, etc. So I'm saying, what's the basic element? Because even on this earth, we have elements. We have water, we have soil, we have air. But what's the basic element that we need to consider? And here I'm saying, with all those resources, nothing could happen if there is no care. And that care I'm really talking about is, you notice the teachers were involved in the socio-emotional type of development and engagement with learners. So we really need to look at care. What are the elements of care? And it's about how we talk with people. It's about the statements that we make. It's about how we elevate people when we talk to them. And it's about enhancement all the way. And for many individuals, care, you were never brought up with care. You did not engage care within your setting. So how do you know how to care? And these are the things that we need to understand as educators, is what does it mean to care? How do I show care? How do I embrace care at the same time? And then the second C is connection. Connection with whom? Connection with others. Connection with the wider world outside. Connection with myself. Understanding who I am. Understanding that I actually do not have limits. Because when you work with students and they see what they are capable of, it's like, oh, I did not know that I could do that. So many people come in with the limited idea, I can't do that. The straightaways, I can't do that, because they are socialized with limitations, and we've got to reduce that limitation to what's possible in the wider world. So our connections with whom we connect is essentially important, and very essential is the experience, the practical engagement, and whether I'm talking with you, whether I'm interacting with any instrument during an investigation, whether I'm in the garden planting a plant, that experience is so important. And teachers and learners have had to be extremely agile in their thinking and responses to extreme uncertainty. That is what we have to think about when we're working with experience as well, is that there is so much uncertainty. And when we work with VUCA in the world, then we have to think about this volatility and how we are responding, but we actually need to go beyond responding. How are we being proactive to what could be coming up as well? But as we know, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I want to say that on the basis of that, I have now completed my presentation, and I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. That was a very inspiring talk. And I'm pretty sure there are lots of ideas out there on the virtual platform across the world. We have a couple of questions that was that I know that Christoph is bombing us with the questions, and it regards the STEAM.
Okay.
Then I'll try to make a kind of a synthesis of all these questions.
Oh, okay.
This is about the perceptions of learners about STEAM and the multicultural society, and the way mathematics and science is taught in school. So do you have in your experience ideas that is there a way to promote this multicultural thinking for STEAM education with technology?
Absolutely. And let me tell you that we are presently working with that. I mean, we've moved from STEM to STEAM, and that's something that we actually have to embrace. We have an organization, well, there is an organization in South Africa, which is called WESA, W-E-S-S-A, which is the Wildlife and Environment Society of South Africa. And when you come through to Durban, where I live, you will definitely be taken to WESA, where you will engage with their wide variety that they have. But that's not only there. We also have it within our university as well. So when you look at STEAM, we're really looking at technologies as well, where children are solving problems within their environments. So when you're looking at access to water, for example, I don't have the pictures here, but there's a device that the children actually build. It's a wooden device. It has a string. It has a bottle in it, a bucket really, that you can go down, fill this container with water. It comes up on a pulley system. There's a pedal at the bottom. You press the pedal, and that then dispenses the water to you. So instead of you going into a big bucket to go and dish water out, you can now actually drop this cup, which is on like a lever, and you can then pick up that water. That's one example, but we have so many other examples with regard to students being engaged in looking at how they can use an environmental aspects, how they can use building blocks, where you take a Coke bottle, you fill it with a whole lot of plastic, and you're now going to take that and you're going to create a wall. So you build a wall using the Coke bottles that are filled with plastic. And so when you're looking at art, you're going to say, so where's the art in all of that? The art is in the fact that it's not just about the technology of building the wall, it's about the creativeness of how you actually build that wall. There is a pre-primary school in Cape Town, and I share this with students when I was teaching students from Poland last year. There is a pre-primary school in Cape Town that is built only with recycled materials. And in terms of the art, if you have to see that building, it is absolutely phenomenal. And these are the things that when we're looking at the work, and when I'm working with students as well, or the colleagues are working with students, we really need to think about, and as I said to you, I'm transdisciplinary more and more, the integration of art into the sciences as well. I can stop there. If you want me to talk, I can give you many more examples.
Thank you. Actually, we do have another question. It comes from Brazil. And the question is that, in your point of view, the greatest lesson in current pandemic is about acceleration to adopt new practices, or to adapt the same practices to a new context, or both, which means that how does the pandemic actually change the way we teach and learn in general?
Okay, so I want to say, in terms of the pandemic changing, no, it's about us changing. And working with that particular context. So in looking at it, I would really say that in my instance, if I think about the teaching and how we've worked with the students, you cannot take the content as the content that you've used in the past and just give it over. I can tell you that there are individuals who would probably load content up onto a system, and the students interact with it asynchronously. Now, what does that do for the student? So for me, I think what is very important is that you have to look at how you take that chunk of material and how you break it up into exciting, stimulating, and interrogating ways that the learners can now look at it in a different way. So when we speak about comprehension in science, and we say, but comprehension is something you do in English, you know, where you have a passage and you have a whole lot of questions linked to that passage. There are so many methods that we should be taking and embracing from all the different subjects and integrating it into, because what we need to think about is our learners, some of them are visual, some of them are auditory, some of them are tactile. So how are we now responding to this whole range of learners that we are actually engaging with? And for me, it's really essentially important that anything that we do is about that learner that's in that house in that rural area so far away who only has access to a cell phone. That's my point that I'm going to work with. But I also have to take into account learners who have all the resources as well. So for a teacher, think about this mixing that you have to have within your lessons, where you're working with taking everybody to that level, but you're coming in, and I'm going to say coming in with the mesh of strategies to come to that level. I don't know if I've answered the question, but yeah.
No, these are interesting ideas, and we do have different learners, different surroundings, different environment, and different possibilities. And then I believe that in many occasions, there are teachers who try just to adapt everything they did before in the classroom into the digital world. And it doesn't work because students are even more clever to use the technology than what we are.
I ask my students to help me sometimes during a lecture. I get stuck with something and I say to them, wait now, I forgot now. Tell me, what is it I'm supposed to do? I've forgotten. So, you know, and I think that's the important thing. We are learning together. And that's what we need to embrace. We need to be open to that, you know, to be flexible and and I don't want to say to allow, no, that's a bad word, but to say we are open, we are learning together. And the tone that you set in your classroom, whether it's a virtual or it's a face-to-face or mask-to-mask, whatever the case may be, is crucially important. That tone, you are not there as I'm the teacher. No. I'm here with you.
Excellent. That's a good place to end the discussion and the talk. Thank you very much for this inspiring event. And thank you for having giving us a lot of thoughts for the upcoming times and upcoming teaching practices. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And this wraps up the session in the LUMA days. The symposium continues at 12:30 Finnish time, so Eastern European time, and hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.